Congruent angles are the same measure. So an example of congruent angles would be if you had, if I draw an angle over here and we'll say that's angle A. You have angle B, we'll say over here, and I say that both of them are 60 degrees. What can I then say? First of all, the measure of angle A is equal to the measure of angle what? Therefore, as a result, I can say what? That angle A then must be what? Congruent to angle what? The measures are equal. The angles themselves are said to be congruent. Probably the most important thing, other than being able to recognize congruent angles in this section, is this right here. Guys, you'll deal with this over and over and over and over again. It's like the, remember I made a big deal of a linear pair? You guys remember me going into that, saying if you got a straight line, then two angles have to add to what? The two angles that create that straight line have to add to 180. Remember I had this. The measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 has to equal what? And that's one of those things I can look at a picture and tell that, correct? I don't have to get told that in the given. The other thing is vertical angles. When two lines intersect, the opposite angles created are called vertical angles. So if I have two lines, is that two lines intersected? How many angles are created? Which ones are vertical angles? Angle 2 and angle what? And what else? There you go. Those are what? Because when two lines intersect, four angles are created, are they not? The opposite angles created are said to be what is called vertical angles. But you know what the most important thing about all of this is? Vertical angles are always what do you think I want to say here? Vertical angles are always what? Congruent. So I know right now, just by looking at this picture, that the opposite angles created, that angle 2 has to be congruent to what? Angle 4. And that angle 1 has to be congruent to angle what? No matter how you draw two lines intersecting, what do you always know about the opposite angles? What do you know about the adjacent angles? Add to 180. The opposite angles are what? Congruent. No matter how I draw, them, that's always the case. I don't care how you try to draw them, whether you draw them to where they almost look like they're like that, what's going to happen? Don't write this down. The opposite angles are what? I don't care how kind of, if you make them like this, guess what? The opposite angles are what? Congruent. Period. Forever and ever. And the ones beside each other add to what? So anytime you get a picture like this, that's the case. There are some other theorems in this section as well. I'd like to do some examples from this worksheet before we go on to talking about that first, though. Let's look at number 1. We're right here. Find the value of x in each one. Each time when you have things like this, even though when they're easy, I want you to go ahead and write the equation for me. What is the equation I could write here? What do I know? That these two lines intersect. What do I know about the opposite angles? No, the opposite angles. Congruent. So I know that x has to be equal to what? And that's what the answer is, isn't it? Number 2. Those set of opposite ones are always congruent. What do I know here? What equation could I set up here? X, whatever this one is, equals whatever that one is, which is what? X and 110. So x is what? What about number 3?
47.
Yeah, you might be able to figure that out, but what do I want you to always do? What did I say? Show what I want you to write here on each one. The equation. You may be able to see this in your head here, but there's going to be more complicated equations. So you know that whatever this one is equal to whatever this one is. So what is this one up here? X minus 5 is equal to, what's this one down here? Now, do you know what x is right now? We have to go ahead and solve this, don't we? How do we do that? X is equal to 47. How about here, number 4? Are these two opposite? Are these vertical angles? So what are they? They're the same, right? They're congruent. So what can I say? Do I know what x is yet? What do I have to do to find x? All right? I'll freeze this and let you write it down. Everybody look at number 5. What's my equation now? Are these two vertical angles? So they are what? Equal. So what would I say? Is equal to what? A little bit more complicated equation. What's my first step? I'm left with 2x is equal to what? Now what do I do? X is equal to what? Everybody stop. Don't write it down yet. Look up here. I want to look at number 6. Keep going. Don't stop writing. What about here? Don't jump. This is great that they put this one here. In each case, this one is equal to that one, right? Are you going to be correct if you come up here and say 5x plus 10 equals x plus 20? Is that the situation? Are these two vertical angles? What actually are they? Linear pair. Together they make a straight line. So what do I know? Whatever this one is plus whatever what? That one is equals what? So what is my equation? X plus 5x plus 10, all of that has to equal what? Weird looking equation, probably some what to do? Simplifying, right? Like terms there, that makes 6x, right? Plus 30 equals 180. Subtract what? 6x is equal to what? 150. Divide by 6. X is equal to 15? No, 25. Now write those down. Then when you're done with that, we're going to look at some of the theorems. We're not going to write them down. We're going to look at them. Everybody got that down? Okay. If everyone will look at, I want to look at page 123. The reason I don't want to really write these down is I think we can talk about them and they'll make sense if you can. First of all, this theorem says if two angles are congruent, then their complements are congruent. Now, what does it mean for something to be a complement of something else? Can anyone tell me? When you what to them? You add them together, they equal 90. So what they're saying here is if you have, for instance, a 60-degree angle over here, congruent to a 60-degree angle over here, what is this angle's complement? What's this angle's complement? That's common sense, isn't it? So all they're saying is that the complements of congruent angles have to also be the same, right? Well, that makes sense. They're both what's left out of 90, correct? On this one, if two angles are congruent, then their supplements are the same. Well, let's say you have two 70-degree angles that you say are congruent. What's the only angle that's a supplement of those? 110, right? So wouldn't they have to be the same? So the confusion here is mostly understanding what a supplement and what a complement is. A complement of an angle is what's left to get it to 90, I guess you could say. So if you had a 50-degree angle, the complement of that's what? 40, right? If you had two complements, if you had two angles congruent to each other, they're going to have the same amount left to get to 90, aren't they? If you had two angles congruent, isn't the same amount going to be left to get them to 180? So these, you can kind of figure that out in common sense. Two angles are complementary on the next page. Two angles are complementary, then they are, if they're complementary to the same angle, then they have to be congruent. So if angle 3 is complementary to 4, but angle 5 was complementary to 4, then those two have to be equal because they have to be what? The same amount that's left out of 90, correct? That makes the same thing for supplementary. If angle 1 is supplementary to angle 2, and angle 3 is supplementary to angle 2, well then 1 and 3 have to be the same because they're the same amount. They have the same amount left to get to what? 180. Okay? They also say here, I think you guys could have figured this out on your own. If two angles are congruent and supplementary, then each is a right angle. What's the only way to split up 180 evenly? 90 and what? All right angles are congruent. Did I need to tell you that one? Probably not. As long as you know that all right angles are how many degrees? 90 degrees, right? So don't let those kind of, they're simple concepts made, you know, the theorems kind of make them maybe sound a little harder than they are. So we're going to apply that. What is the measure of an angle? That is supplementary to Hij if Hij is congruent to KLM. So they're saying their KLM is how many degrees? 54 degrees, right? And they're saying it's congruent to what? Hij, so it's 54 degrees. And they want to know what's the measure of an angle what? Supplementary to that angle. Well, what would it be? Whatever 180 minus what? 54 is. What would the answer to that be? Is that right? Did I do that correctly? Put it in your calculator and see. Okay, here it says, and these things are, you know, as a whole, this can sound confusing, can it? But if you look at each piece separately, it's not so bad. It leads you to the answer. If angle 2 is complementary to 3, so angle 2 plus angle 3 equals what? 90. Angle 1 is complementary to angle 2. So angle 2 plus angle 1 also equals what? Angle 1 is equal to what? 35. What are a measure of angle 2 and angle 3? Yes. Just pull harder, pull harder. Thank you. Good idea there. Angle 2, so angle 2 is complementary to both what? 3 and what? So what does that mean? That these two are what? They're the same, right? So if angle 1 is 35, then the measure of angle what? 3 has to be what? And then measure of angle 2 would be whatever's left out of what? 90 for each of these. So what's left? 55? Is that correct? Why is 55 right? Because 55 plus 35 equals what? Okay. Now they'll also do ones like we did before. What is the value of x if angle PQR and SQT are vertical angles? So that means that's congruent to that one, correct? PQR is what? 47 degrees, and they say that angle SQT is what? 3x plus 2. What's the difference between this problem and these up here? They wrote it down in words and had you label the figure, didn't they? But it's the same concept, isn't it? What would my equation be? 3x plus 2 equals 47. They don't add to 180, they're congruent, right? X is equal to 15. Easy peasy. Find the measure of the angle that is supplementary to B if the measure of angle B is 58. 180 minus 58, which would be 122 degrees. Okay, I'll zoom this out. Not so bad, is it?